are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden.
How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on Firstpost America. Hello and welcome to Firstpost America. I'm Eric Ham, coming to you live from the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. Over the next few minutes, we'll take you from the United States and around the world, covering the top stories of the day. But before that, here's a look at the latest headlines. Norway, Ireland, and Spain to recognize Palestine as a state beginning May 28th. Palestinians hailed the decision as historical, but Israel says the move is like giving a prize to murderers. The Pentagon says that Russia launched a space weapon and deployed it in the orbit of a U.S. government satellite. Moscow calls Washington's accusations fake news. Armed men killed at least 40 villagers in Nigeria's north-central region. Authorities blame the attack on a rivalry between farmers and nomads over control for water and land. U.S. tech giant Microsoft to invest $1 billion in Kenya with aims of building a green data center and research facility on artificial intelligence. And India reels under a severe heat wave, which is expected to last through this week in the northern region. Temperatures in the capital, New Delhi, reach 116 degrees Fahrenheit or 47 degrees Celsius, forcing the closure of all schools. We begin in the Middle East, where Israeli troops have thrust deeper into Rafah as airstrikes pound the enclave. Israel believes that Hamas is holding several hostages in Rafah. However, a new U.S. intelligence report says that Israel has only been able to eliminate 30 to 35% of Hamas fighters since the war began in October of last year. Meanwhile, the bombardment and fighting in Rafah has forced close to 1 million Palestinians to flee the city. Now, with Gaza in complete ruins, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says that Israel will play no role in rebuilding the Strip. Netanyahu said, and I quote, "Rebuilding Gaza, that was never on the cards," end quote. The Prime Minister also said that Israel will play no part in rebuilding settlements in the Gaza Strip, but would retain security control over Gaza. The Israeli leader says he wants Arab nations and the international community to undertake the reconstruction of Gaza. And he also dismissed the possibility of the Palestinian Authority controlling Gaza, saying they would let Hamas back in. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu's statements come after he was criticized by ministers from his own war cabinet for not providing a plan on the future of Gaza. Both Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and Minister Benny Gantz have publicly called out Netanyahu over his intentions in Gaza. Now, in response, Prime Minister Netanyahu said, quote, "I have a very clean plan. We have a plan to get rid of Hamas," end quote. Now, Israel has shared a revised plan with the United Nations regarding the future military action in Rafah, and Washington seems to have accepted the proposal. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says Israel has given the Biden administration written assurances of minimizing civilian casualties in Rafah.
The President's been very clear with Prime Minister Netanyahu about that. I've done the same with my various counterparts. We have commitments from Israel, including in writing, about the steps that haven't been taken, that need to be taken, that they say they will take and are taking, and we're working to hold them to those steps. We have to make sure that more aid gets into more people more effectively.
Meanwhile, the United States continues to ensure that humanitarian aid makes its way into Gaza as Palestinians desperately await food and medical supplies.
You know, as we've talked about, aid will be delivered to the floating pier, then transported via logistic support vessels, delivered to the causeway, and then put into assembly areas on shore. And that's where NGOs pick up that aid and then further distribute it. So to my knowledge, there's no stoppage. Again, as we mentioned, this is going to be a crawl, walk, run approach, and you're going to see those numbers increase in the days ahead.
As Hamas regroups and with no end to the fighting, the questions remain: who will take on the enormous task of rebuilding Gaza, and how long will Palestinians have to live their lives relying on humanitarian aid? And shifting focus to Europe, where Vladimir Putin is flexing his nuclear superiority, Russia has begun military drills on the border with Ukraine, simulating the use of tactical nuclear weapons. The drills are taking place in Russia's southwestern region, which also includes parts of eastern Ukraine that's now occupied by Russia. Russian forces have deployed the ground-launched Iskander missiles and the air-launched Kenzo hypersonic missiles, both of which are capable of delivering a nuclear warhead. Now, these drills come right after Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky urged NATO to use fighter jets to shoot down Russian missiles. Russia's defense ministry says that the nuclear drills are only the first stage of a larger military exercise. However, Moscow did not elaborate on how it plans to carry out the subsequent stages of the drills. Now, the Kremlin says that the nuclear drills are designed to send a message to NATO to not get directly involved in Ukraine. Moscow says the latest drills are in response to provocative statements and threats from Western nations, including France and the United Kingdom. The Kremlin has been particularly angered by French President Emmanuel Macron, who floated the possibility of stationing troops in Ukraine. Similarly, remarks by the United Kingdom's Foreign Secretary David Cameron about Kyiv using British weapons to target Russia have soured ties with Moscow. Now, with the nuclear drills beginning in eastern Ukraine, the battlefield situation in the country's north remains grim. Ukrainian troops say that Kharkiv is seeing a siege worse than the eastern city of Bakhmut, which was captured by Russians last year.
It is 24/7. The infantry keeps coming. We keep fighting their attacks. At least we are trying to. Whenever possible, we put them down. We were positioned in the Bakhmut area before. Now we have been transferred here. It is much hotter here. In Bakhmut, it was less intense as compared to what's going on here, but we keep pushing them away.
Now, Russia has numerous weapon systems capable of delivering a tactical nuclear payload that are different in size and scope. In fact, some are even capable of wiping out entire cities. Western militaries will be closely watching the exercises to draw conclusions on just how serious Putin really is about deploying nuclear weapons. And now moving to the Caribbean nation of Haiti, a delegation of Kenya's command staff arrived in the violence-plagued nation on Monday. Now, this comes ahead of the long-stalled arrival of Kenyan troops in Haiti. Kenya will deploy its battle-hardened special forces to Port-au-Prince, and these troops have spent years fighting the jihadist group Al-Shabaab in East Africa. The Kenyan forces are part of a United Nations-backed multinational security support mission that was announced last year. And this is part of a larger initiative to stabilize Haiti amid the ongoing gang violence. Now, the delegation is expected to assess whether equipment and facilities are ready before the 1,000-strong troop deployment begins later this week. Their deployment coincides with Kenyan President William Ruto's state visit to the United States. In fact, tomorrow, President Joe Biden will host his Kenyan counterpart at the White House. The two leaders will focus on strengthening economic and security ties between the two countries. And the trip comes as the Biden administration seeks to deepen cooperation with African nations amid growing competition on the continent with its top rivals, China and Russia. In fact, earlier this month, the U.S. Southern Command flew contractors to Haiti to set up a temporary living quarters for the arrival of the Kenyan-led peacekeeping force. A total of 2,500 officers are expected to join the mission from countries including Kenya, Chile, Nigeria, Chad, Jamaica, Grenada, Paraguay, Burundi, and Mauritius. The UN mission aims to fight the deadly gangs that have seized control of much of Haiti's capital, Port-au-Prince, after launching coordinated attacks in February. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has warned that the Caribbean nation is on the precipice of becoming an all-out failed state. And Haiti has slipped into a deep humanitarian and security crisis and is currently being ruled by a transitional government which has failed to stop the gang violence. Now, in some good news, on Monday, Haiti's main international airport reopened after nearly 3 months. Now, as the transitional government and Haiti's national police await the arrival of foreign forces, they're hoping the global task force is able to restore law and order and end the months of mayhem. And Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has created an uproar in Sri Lanka. The outrage comes after the Canadian Parliament decided to recognize May 18th as Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day. Now, Prime Minister Trudeau has accused the Sri Lankan government of carrying out a genocide against ethnic Tamils in the civil war that lasted nearly 3 decades. Sri Lanka hit back at Trudeau for engaging in vote bank politics, and Sri Lanka's neighbor, India, has also accused Trudeau of appeasement politics and hypocrisy. Our next report explains how Trudeau is fast losing friends in Asia.
Canada is at loggerheads with an Asian country again. No, we're not talking about India. This time, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has angered Sri Lanka with his latest remarks. Trudeau has called for greater accountability for crimes during the Sri Lanka conflict, saying that he will always advocate justice. The Canadian Prime Minister was referencing to the Sri Lankan Civil War that lasted over a quarter of a century and ended in 2009. The war was fought between the Sri Lankan government and ethnic Tamil separatists. The armed conflict saw the deaths of tens of thousands of civilians. The Canadian Parliament will now also recognize the 18th of May as Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day. Canada says that ethnic Tamils were brutally targeted by the Sri Lankan government. The Canadian Prime Minister also urged Colombo to respect freedom of religion and support pluralism to ensure lasting peace on the island nation. But Trudeau's sermons have not been received well by Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan government has hit out at the Canadian Prime Minister. Colombo has dismissed Trudeau's allegations of a genocide against ethnic Tamils. It has accused Trudeau of engaging in petty vote bank politics, and even called the Canadian Prime Minister incompetent. Sri Lanka also said that Trudeau glared over the atrocities that ethnic Tamil separatist groups carried out in northern Sri Lanka. Colombo added that Trudeau had a partisan narrative and was being put forward to disrupt the harmony among Sri Lankans, calling Trudeau's remarks outrageous. Sri Lanka's foreign minister accused the Canadian PM of disinformation and encouraging hatred. The Lankan Foreign Ministry further clarified that the civil war resulted in the deaths of Sinhalese, Tamils, Malays, and was not just a military campaign against ethnic Tamils. The civil war saw heavy fighting for decades between the Sri Lankan army and ethnic Tamil rebels from the LTTE. The Tamil group had run a military campaign demanding a separate Tamil homeland in parts of northern and eastern Sri Lanka. The LTTE is listed as a terrorist organization in 33 countries, including in Canada. Sri Lanka says such statements by the Trudeau government expose its double standards. Colombo also says Trudeau is consumed by vote bank politics funded by people with vested interests. Interestingly, Sri Lanka's neighbor India has also accused Trudeau of vote bank politics by allowing political space to Khalistani terrorists.
You would have seen a press release that we made when we summoned the Deputy High Commissioner regarding an event that was attended by the Prime Minister where Khalistan slogans were raised. The other media engagement that you are referring to took place on the sidelines of this event. In our view, Prime Minister Trudeau's remarks, he has made those remarks earlier as well, so it's nothing new. His remarks to us, it illustrates once again the kind of political space that has been given in the country, in Canada, to separatism, to extremism and violent people who practice violence. This not only impacts India-Canada relations, but also encourages a climate of violence and criminality in Canada to the detriment of its citizens.
Colombo and New Delhi have accused Trudeau of ignoring human rights violations in other countries, including in his own. Ties between India and Canada have been severely impacted after Justin Trudeau accused India of killing a Khalistani terrorist, a Canadian citizen, on Canada's soil. New Delhi has rejected Trudeau's claims and called them absurd. And Ottawa is yet to provide any proof to back its claims. But the Canadian Prime Minister seems to be willing to risk diplomatic ties for political gains at home.
And finally, a brutal heat wave in Mexico is causing monkeys to drop dead. Locals say the animals are falling from trees like apples. More than 80 howler monkeys have reportedly lost their lives, and several others are suffering from severe dehydration. This species of monkey is considered endangered across the world. Our final report takes you inside the growing crisis.
Mexico's brutal heat wave is not sparing anyone, especially the howler monkeys in the southeastern state of Tabasco. It's so hot in the region that the animals are dropping dead. Eyewitnesses say it feels like monkeys are falling from the trees like apples. Now, local media says that over 80 mid-sized primates have been reported dead so far. The die-off started around May 5th and hit its peak over the last weekend. Wildlife experts say they have begun rescuing monkeys on the verge of dying, and their condition is critical with loss of consciousness and signs of severe dehydration.
We have registered 83 dead specimens. There are also orphaned calves because many adult females, have died. Some offspring have managed to survive. That is the problem with this species' mortality in this very hot season in the state. The temperature has reached 51 degrees Celsius, and the wildlife is suffering because of the lack of water.
Not just the heat wave, but experts have also attributed the deaths of monkeys to loss of habitat and water scarcity.
There has been a lot of habitat degradation, so there is more light penetration, higher temperatures, and water scarcity. Above all, there has been an increase in the number of fires that damage the few habitats or refuges for these species.
Normally quite intimidating, howler monkeys are muscular and can be around 60 centimeters tall or almost 2 feet tall, with tails just as long. The species is classified as endangered on the International Union for Conservation of Nature's Red List. Volunteers who are trying to save these monkeys in Mexico are placing buckets of water and fruits around their habitat to prevent more deaths. They're also taking the help of veterinarians to save the primates.
The volunteers asked for help. They asked me if I could examine the animals. I said, yes, no problem, and told them to come in, but I didn't think there were so many of them. When they brought them in, I realized that there were quite a few animals.
As temperatures soar to almost 50 degrees Celsius in Tabasco, Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has also expressed concern about the deadly heat wave. He himself hails from the state of Tabasco and says this year's heat wave is the worst he has known. Meanwhile, local authorities have confirmed monkey deaths without giving a clear count. Mexico's Environment Ministry says it's investigating whether extreme heat is killing the monkeys or a disease is threatening the vulnerable species. The ministry says several possible reasons could be behind the deaths, including heat stroke, malnutrition, or the spraying of crops with toxic agrochemicals. It's not just monkeys, humans too are feeling the heat as well. The ongoing heat wave has killed at least 26 people since March in the North American country. Mexico's largest chain of convenience stores has limited the purchases of ice to just 2 or 3 bags per customer. But while humans struggle with ice shortages, for the monkeys, it's not a question of comfort, but of life or death.
That's our show for today. We certainly thank you so much for tuning in. We hope to see you right back here again tomorrow. Thanks again for watching. From impeachments to inaugurations, if it's a political story, we are on the scene. The race for the White House is heating up.
We're beating Biden. How dare he say that?
If it's breaking news, we're live with the latest coverage. From the White House, the State Department, and Capitol Hill, we know the issues, but above all, we know the players to bring you the latest in-depth analysis on all the key stories that we're covering. I'm Eric Ham. Join me from Washington here on First Post America.